So for those who don't know, Dr. Penn's book, My Jam, Reflections on the Relationship Between Music and Religion, was published this past year. It covers your move from traditional theology to what you call humanist theology of hip hop. Just curious for folks who haven't may not have read the book, what inspired this collection of essays, and how does hip hop music function as a system of meaning making equal to the church?
Well, first, thanks for this opportunity to chat. Looking forward to it. I was having a conversation with a couple of friends, and we were talking about the work we had been doing over some years. And it occurred to me that I'd been writing about, particularly hip hop, for roughly 30 years. And so I decided that it might be kind of interesting to see where I've landed, the shifts and changes in my thinking, and how this attention to music has informed and influenced my thinking on a variety of other issues. There are ways in which, for me, music is a type of grammar and vocabulary, a kind of language we use to explore and explain how we occupy time and space and the things that matter to us in that occupation of time and space. And so that motivated the book. I have a particular definition of religion. It has nothing to do with doctrines and creeds. It has nothing to do with churches, mosques, and synagogues. That my argument is this, that at its core, religion is simply a tool we use to explore and unpack human experience. That religion becomes a way we probe human experience for answers to the fundamental questions of human existence. Who are we? What are we? When are we? Why are we? Sometimes we answer those questions in relationship to some sense of the divine, but for secular humanists like me, there is no divine to appeal to, right? This is just how we move through the world, how we wrestle with these questions that shape what it means to be human. And so I think that hip hop is one of the more recent cultural developments. It's a particular tool we use to explore and explain our experience. It cuts to the quick. It tells us something about what it means to be a meaningful creature in the context of human history.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you have something else to add to that? Sorry.
No, I'll add as you
Yeah,
ask the
keep
next
going.
question.
Okay, cool. My first question about Kendrick Lamar, we talk a lot about hip hop music. Let's talk about the best, in my opinion. Big night at the Grammys. Obviously the other night too. Not that we look to those things necessarily. Um, my first question is about Kendrick. You discussed the concept of grotesque realism, the idea of a body that is open, messy, and porous rather than clean and sealed like traditional religious figures. Could you talk about how Kendrick's track you mentioned most DNA? I'd read
Mhm.
about the book. Can you talk a little bit about how that celebrates this concept of the open body and refuses to be confined by social norms or policing?
Yeah, I think, and again, one of Kendrick Lamar is one of my favorite artists. I think he is extremely talented, and I think he explores issues in a way that is compelling, that's informative, that's inspiring. And DNA, this is a track that has deep meaning for me. And I think one of the ways he gets at this is the idea that as embodied creatures, we are informed and influenced by things around us, right? Things around us penetrate us. They shape how we understand our experiences. They shape how we understand our past, our future, our present. And this is meaningful. And I think with Kendrick Lamar, what you get is an appreciation for the messiness of life that there is with Kendrick Lamar, and particularly with DNA, no effort to present us as problem free. That for him, the solution isn't to be problem free. The solution is to embrace our complexity, to embrace our messiness, that there is something about these contradictions in our lives that render us deeply human. And I find that really, really inspiring in terms of Kendrick Lamar, that we are messy creatures, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think back to like studying postmodernist sort of
Mm.
thought in our school.
Say
Really fa-
more. Say more.
um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think in elite art communities, these they may have had a privilege of tackling some of these issues that oftentimes I feel may have been delayed for obvious reasons in Black and Brown communities, like processing these sort of realities or truths. So. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's an interesting cycle, I suppose, in the development of hip hop music. So,
Yeah. I mean, there's this cultural code called respectability politics, right? And the way it worked in Black and Brown communities was the assumption that if Black and Brown people could present themselves in a way that conformed to social norms, that was non-threatening to whites, whites would embrace them and welcome them into the good stuff of US society. We know that didn't happen, but for Kendrick Lamar and artists like him, there is no sense that respectability politics is the way to go, that we have to present ourselves in ways that are complex, that are thick, that are messy, that to be human is to be messy. And
yeah,
that the effort to kind of restrict ourselves really takes something away from our humanity.
yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, well, speaking to that further, moving towards the black male body. So, oftentimes the black male body in our culture is invisible. It fails, our society really fails to address the weight and presence of the black body in our current visual culture, where black bodies are hyper visible in the media, but remain quite vulnerable politically to violence. How does hip hop help reflesh these bodies in a way that maybe the church has not, or history has not? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There are ways in which black bodies are hyper visual and they are hyper visual as a problem, as a threat, but they are not hypervisual in terms of beauty, of value, of importance. They are hypervisual as a problem in the context of the United States, as a threat to guard ourselves against. And this is problematic. And I think that traditional religious institutions like the church get this wrong because they're premised upon the idea that humans are screwed up right from the very beginning. Humans are just screwed up. And that the only way in which we can improve is through a relationship of submission to this divine force, right? That is this divine force in us that makes us tolerable. That any beauty, any value we have is because of that. But I think within the context of much hip hop, there's an appreciation for our embodiment. There's an appreciation for Black beauty, for Black substance, for Black meaning that doesn't require this sense that we are debased and unworthy, but a deep appreciation that there's something about our material existence that in and of itself has value, that has importance, that has meaning, that we are fundamentally significant and beautiful. And I think one of the ways in which hip hop gets at that is just a celebration of Black embodiment, a profound appreciation of Black embodiment. Think in terms of the aesthetic, think in terms of clothing, for example, that there's everything about the transitions in hip hop culture's sense of clothing that are all about look at me, right?
Spectacle.
There's
Yeah.
something valuable here. Look at me.
Mhm.
From Kendrick Lamar's custom made Chanel tuxedo, right, to earlier forms, the Lees with the permanent crease and the Pumas, it all is meant to make these bodies apparent and beautiful. right? That it calls attention to them, not as a problem, but as a sign of value and beauty.
Yeah. So I mean, in a way, it's hip hop is filling a void that religion does not. But it does bring to question. I'm one of these folks that grew up very secular, so I know a lot about Christianity because there are attacks on my community, but not so much about all religions. So, and you may be someone who knows a bit more about that. Is there a religious practice that sort of embraces some of these themes?
I think so. For example, I'll talk in terms of the community I know best, the African American community. And there are some progressive churches that embrace these principles that are all about a rethinking of embodiment, right? A valuing of Black bodies. There are some Black ministers who are getting this right, but it seems to me they are typically the exception to the rule. And many of these ministers have also embraced hip hop culture. And as more than a, hey, maybe if we pretend we like this, we'll get young people to come. But no, they really see value and importance in this cultural form.
Yeah, there's a lot of Christian rap in Florida, mostly white folks. But yeah, definitely saw a fair amount of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an old enterprise. The early groups like Gospel Gangsters and then more recently Lecrae, right? So this kind of orientation, and then think in terms of the influence of Islam on hip hop culture. And this goes
Mhm.
back, right? We're talking about within the early decade of hip hop's development. Islam has a profound importance,
Yeah.
not so much Sunni Islam, but the Nation of Islam and the
Mhm.
5% Nation. Their thinking is all in hip hop. One of the greatest lyricists ever is Rakim.
Yeah.
He is one of the greatest lyricists ever. Mic drop, boom. And within his lyrics, there are all these references to the 5% Nation. Right? You get people like Ice Cube, who has a relationship to the Nation of Islam or Public Enemy, right? KRS-One says Farrakhan's a prophet, and I think you ought to listen to what he can say to you, right? And so there is this relationship. So very early on, there are forms of religion, Christianity, Islam, that provide a grammar and vocabulary that artists are making use of.
Well, great. We're going to move on to another theme of our talk and a theme presented in the book. But I do welcome questions about the body and materiality from folks in the chat box if they or the question box if you have any. So I want to talk about zombies a little bit. Uh, so one of the most striking metaphors in the book is your description of African Americans being socially constructed as zombies, figures who are undead or devoid of meaning. Um, you argue that artists like Kanye West disrupt this by declaring, "I'm a god." How does this seemingly arrogant claim function as a necessity or a necessary philosophical move to break that logic
Yeah.
of the zombie?
Well, I use that image of the zombie to get at the idea that within the context of US culture, Black people become a symbol of what the larger society fears most, death. And death in more than one way, not just physical death, but the idea of being irrelevant, without meaning. That much of this anxiety and fear gets placed on Black bodies, gets exercised through how the society approaches and handles Black bodies. But I think there are ways in which some artists, and Kanye West is one, I Am a God, is a claim to what matters most to people, right? If there is something that represents life at its best, West has claimed it. Now, I get it. That song is a response to some stuff that happens at Fashion Week in Paris. I get it. But it seems to me there's still something about it that refuses to understand Blacks as a device to comfort whites. Instead, he is claiming what is best about the universe. Or you get someone like Jay-Z who says, You're in the presence of a you're in presence of a king, scratch that, you're in the presence of a God, right? So there's still this sense of a kind of presence that is deeply meaningful. Or think in terms of, and I know we'll talk about him later, but I'll bring him up now. Think in terms of someone like Tupac, Black Jesus, claims a special knowledge. Yeah, a special knowledge that can be used to revive life. He's claiming what is best about the universe. For theists, there's nothing higher than the divine. Yeah. And so you get these artists who are saying, no, Black people are associated with what is best in the universe.
Yeah. And so then what would you say about I think about artists like Tyler the Creator.
Yeah.
I think it was Sorry Not Sorry on I think definitely Call Me If You Get Lost, but there's a song on there where he declares, I think it is Sorry Not Sorry, um where he addresses the concept of being a god. Um, wait, do you feel like he is rejecting this idea, moving past this idea, or how do you feel like that? Well, I guess I should ask first. Are you familiar with that reference? I'm sure
Mhm.
you probably are. Do you feel like he is rejecting that idea, um, or you just you going a bit deeper, moving past
Yeah.
those
I think
concepts?
he's signifying it, kind of exposing it, right? As exposing it as a kind of cultural code and looking at its limitations.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite tracks by Tyler, the Creator, is Yonkers.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think there are complexities there, that there are ways in which he forces us to look at what we are most uncomfortable with,
Mhm.
right? And I think there are ways in which he is forcing us to look at the very nature of life within the context of the United States, that there is something about life in the United States that involves a kind of fascination with demise. And he signifies it and forces us to confront it.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Think about it for sure. I was definitely one of those Tyler fans as like a young queer person when he was dropping the F word. Everybody was freaking out about it. To me,
Yeah,
like I really felt like he was reflecting like you mentioned, the world around him and maybe even a
mhm.
bit of himself.
Yeah,
Um, and so I've always found his I guess his rise really, just seeing what he's accomplished these days
yeah,
is just crazy. But I just think of his rise so often,
yeah,
and definitely
yeah.
one of my favorites.
And that isn't to say that hip hop artists always get it right, right? That there are ways in which hip hop artists reinforce some of the worst behaviors and inclinations of US society, right? There are ways in which hip hop artists embrace and celebrate homophobia, transphobia, right? Gender bias, right? So there are ways in which these artists both push against and embrace some of the worst behaviors and inclinations framing US society.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that brings us to our next question. You draw on Albert Camus's concept of the absurd, the
Hmm.
conflict between our desire for meaning and a ultimately silent universe. Today, amid widespread political and social instability, do you think that the gangster rap posture of mocking the system is a more honest response to absurdity than the hopefulness offered by a traditional religion?
Yeah. Yeah, Albert Camus, that dude is one of my favorite thinkers, right? I just think he is on point. And his idea is that we are creatures with questions, right? This is what it means to be human. We are looking for the points of connection. We want things to make sense. We want the universe to expose its mysteries to us. We ask the universe questions and we're met with silence. And his argument is that experience of not having these answers given to us is the absurd, right? That meaning isn't available to us. That if the universe has a larger meaning, it is not available to us. This, I think that's deep. Um, and so I think there are ways in which hip hop artists lean into this, and not just gangster rap, right? I mean, I think there are ways in which hip hop artists at their best lean into this. And for me, they represent what Camus calls the rebel or the absurd hero. And these are folks who kind of understand how this works and they don't surrender to the absurdity. They fight against it. They may not win, but they fight against it. The example that Camus uses is the myth of Sisyphus. And I'm sure folks are familiar with it, but if not, this is the pen kind of quick take on it. There's this dude, Sisyphus, who gets in all sorts of trouble with the Greek gods, right? Because on some level, he's outsmarting them. But they finally capture him and they are going to punish him. And from their perspective, he's going to feel this. The punishment is there's a rock and a hill. And Sisyphus is going to have to roll this rock up the hill, only to have this rock come back down. And he wasn't going to have to do that for a day, a week, a year. This was going to be forever. And the gods assumed this would just destroy him, it would break his will. But Camus argues, no, it reaches a point on one of these runs when the rock reaches the top, and just before it's about to come back down, Sisyphus has a moment of awareness. It clicks for him. He doesn't have the answers, but he has a better sense of who he is and what he has the capacity to do. And what he has the capacity to do is to struggle, to push against, to say no. And I think there are ways in which hip hop artists at their best have a very similar posture. They may not be able to fundamentally change things, but they can say no to it, they can make us aware of it, and they can make it more difficult to normalize the misery of the marginalized.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings us to another topic. I'm actually going to skip ahead, Dr. Penn. Not We're going to
Do
come
your
back.
thing.
We're going to come back to kind of the humanist take on measured realism. But I think what you were just talking about speaks more to some of the sections of your book around the politics of sound, particularly your classification of rap music. Right? You make a distinguishment between the gangster rap and the progressive rap. And I had never heard that term, progressive rap, so it's exciting. And so you describe progressive rap as such as a group like Public Enemy, as a biblical warning of destruction. Could you
Yeah.
expand on how groups like Public Enemy
Yeah.
use this prophetic voice to warn America about its moral decay? And then, what is the big difference that you see between progressive rap
Yeah.
and the gangster rap we were just discussing?
I think on a fundamental level, gangster rap is about inclusion, right? It's not trying to dismantle the US system, right? It's not trying to dismantle capitalism. It's looking for inclusion, right? These are artists who are looking to have some of this good stuff. They're not raising questions about the nature of capitalism, the nature of our political system. They're asking for inclusion, right? They're pushing for inclusion, for success, the American dream, using the outlets that are available to them. The white collar job isn't available to them, but pushing crack is, right? So they're using the mechanisms of success available to them to get inclusion in this American dream, to be able to have the good stuff. So there's still ways, it seems to me, in gangster rap that value is still tied to what you have and the power you can exercise over others based upon this stuff you have. For me, progressive rap is raising questions about this system, right? It's raising questions about social norms, and it's calling for a different way of being. So I think there are ways in which Public Enemy does that, raising questions concerning military, the educational system, right? Political parties, raising questions concerning how life functions in the context of the United States. But it's not just Public Enemy. I think you have to also think in terms of groups like Arrested Development, right? So we're talking 90s now, yeah? There are groups that are all about deeply concerned with raising questions concerning how this US system functions and how accessible is this American dream, right? How functional is this democratic experiment, right? They're raising questions in order to get us to rethink the system and to do something different, right? They're talking revolution, not inclusion.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And so would you say then I mean, I'm not sure, I may already know your answer to this, but would you say that that makes gangster rap a conformist or the ultimate critic? Um,
I don't think it's one or the other, right? This is part of the complexity. There are things, so I think there are ways in which gangster rap exposes problems with our system, the way it excludes, for example. But there are also problems with gangster rap in that it doesn't think beyond the system, it seeks inclusion in the system. So some of the worst behaviors, they simply model.
yeah,
Right. So I think it's complex. There are things about gangster rap that expose problems, and there are things about gangster rap that participates in problems.
yeah, fascinating. So we have an actual question I'm gonna take right now, jump over. Miranda, a student, mentions, would love to hear your thoughts on Run the Jewels and Killer Mike's support of Bernie Sanders when he was running for the Democratic nomination.
Yeah, I like Killer Mike. I think he is thoughtful and incisive. I think what he has to say in terms of the economics of Black life in the United States, right on point. I think his support for economic structures within Black communities, on point. I think the dude, his thought process is correct. That he sees the problems on a fundamental level, right? And that part of and so what you get with Killer Mike, it seems to me, is a recognition that race remains a problem, but that communities that are marginalized also suffer because of class dynamics in this country. And so with Killer Mike, you get an effort to critique and push in a way that combines the problem of racial discrimination and class bias. I think that's on point.
Yeah, I remember when Killer Mike single-handedly changed my view on gun control. Hearing him talk about gun control in the Black community, I was like, oh wow, as a white person, never really thought about it that way. Um, and yeah, I mean, he single-handedly changed my opinion on that during that campaign, actually.
Yeah.
So, very, very obviously powerful voice and person
Dude
in
is
the community.
gifted.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, back to some of the humanism themes introduced in the book. So, as a humanist, you critique your own movement for being overly optimistic. I would agree. You write that hip hop teaches a measured realism, an acknowledgement that progress is not guaranteed and that misery is just a part of life. Why is it vital for humanists to adopt this more tragic perspective from hip hop rather than relying on the supposed inevitability of science and reason?
Okay, so I'm gonna put you on blast. So I'll tell you my answer to that question if you first tell me why you think humanism is too optimistic.
Um, well, first of all, like I tend to see a lot of smiles during political conversations. Um, and I tend to think everybody sort of acts like an organizer for the Democratic Party that when you walk into their office and there's this like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young person who thinks they're going to change the world. Um, and the reality is that they're likely going to work 80-hour work weeks this election, and even if their candidate wins, they're likely to not follow through on a lot of their promises. Um, and I feel like we're in a perpetual state of like toxic positivity. At least some of the humanists I've interacted with. I think, just like anybody, we've got great Christians that I'd stand with them and stand with their values, and I've got some Christians who I despise. And so, I'd say same thing within humanism, really. And so I think for me, it is that sort of unwillingness to um, accept some of the cold hard facts sometimes that are right in front of them, and instead, focus more on the what if you will. And I think that's the wrong course of action. I think we have to really sit with the reality of our time. Um, and I think to sit with that reality, you need to accept the reality of the whole, not the few. And I think oftentimes folks forget that within um, humanist spaces, but religious spaces in general, I think are privileged in that way and overlook the experience of the whole. So.
Yeah. I get that. I get that. It seems to me that I, I understand why theists believe we can get beyond all these problems. We can reimagine this country, right? That we can work all of this stuff out if we just push hard enough, if we are determined enough. But I don't understand how non-theists think that way. For me, non-theists are not paying attention to history. That everything about our history suggests we find ways to be nasty. We find ways to hurt people. We find a group to marginalize. This has always been the case. And so that idea that yes, we can overcome it seems to me that this struggle is forever, that we are constantly pushing against wrongdoing, constantly pushing against our worst inclinations, that we don't, it's not a push, we're done. This is forever. I'm also confused by the assumption on the part of so many non-theists, so many humanists, atheists, skeptics, you pick the category, who assume that our problem is religion. And by religion, they really mean theism. That if we get rid of theism, we get rid of all our problems. That makes no sense. As if non-believers can't be homophobic, like non-believers can't be transphobic, like non-believers can't be racist. They can be. Yeah.
I've
So
certainly heard it.
getting rid of these theistic institutions doesn't solve the problem. The problem is people, right? And so, and for me, that's the optimism, the assumption that if you get rid of this one way of trying to make life meaningful, we've gotten rid of all of our problems. When history would suggest that non-believers have done their share of dirt.
I mean, we've also seen secular forces do a fair amount of harm as well. So,
That's what I mean. Yeah. Yeah. They have done their share of dirt.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair critique. So I welcome anybody on the call who has anything to add to that, or any questions about that as well. And furthermore, you discussed the idea of thick diversity in hip hop, which goes beyond celebrating difference and instead confronts the messiness of conflict, like some of what you just mentioned. So in a polarized society, how do you think we can move away from this more performative diversity to a thick, organic
Yeah.
diversity, the kind you see in rap culture?
Yeah.
And I ask this because I do feel like a lot of Black folks in humanism feel tokenized in many ways,
For
and
good reason.
yeah, and I've heard it from students myself. So, um, what do you feel
Yeah.
is the solution to moving past that?
I'll suggest three things. First, we have to recognize there's a problem,
Mhm.
right? We have to recognize there's a problem and that we don't solve the problem by simply saying, let's get rid of all of the religion stuff.
Mhm.
The problem is deeper than that, that there is a problem. Secondly, folks have to do homework, right? That communities you say you want to help, right? Communities you say you are all about, you ought to know something about them. And stop asking members of those communities to serve as tutors. Do some work. right? Secular people say that they are inquisitive, they are critical thinkers, they read. Well, read about the communities you say you want to help and stop asking those communities to one, pat you on the back, and secondly, teach you. Do some work. Third, we have to appreciate the importance of discomfort, that we tend to want to operate in a way that preserves our comfort. To preserve our comfort is also to reject change. That we
Mhm.
have to appreciate the idea that discomfort is the moment when we are best able to identify our assumptions and challenge them. Discomfort's not a problem. It's a good thing. And tied to that is a rethinking of difference, that we tend to think about difference as a problem to solve, when difference is an opportunity. I'll give you an example of how this sometimes works. I will hear from liberal folks that, I don't think in terms of race, I don't see color. That's not a useful response. That is not a useful response. That is to say, everything stays the same because everything reflects who I am.
Mhm.
The challenge is to see difference and appreciate difference, not try to wipe it out, but to appreciate it. That it is not offensive to see color. That is not offensive. That is a sign that diversity is being embraced. Yes, see color, but don't fundamentally judge the value of people based upon that social code.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I issued a challenge to some of our students for Black History Month to choose a section of the Smithsonian that Trump is trying to wipe out, or has, and teach that during one of their like chapter meetings. Keep the history alive. The old school way. Through word of mouth. Pass these stories along. And so that's kind of what this makes me think about a little bit. I hope that none of them went and asked their black friend to come to their chapters and and
Yeah.
tell stories. Let's hope they're
Yeah.
keeping that history alive. And I know a fair amount of our chapters are pretty diverse, but there are some who certainly have some of the problems that you mentioned. I think there's a lot of white spaces that have the problems you
Yeah.
mentioned. So
Hey, can we do a couple of the questions that have come in?
yeah, we certainly can. Do you see them on your screen?
Yeah, I see
Oh, great,
them.
excellent. Yeah, please.
So the first question, research and what produces hope, and the most hopeful are fundamentalists, and that liberal religions and non-religious score lower. How can we change this to develop hope within a God or without a God or transcendent future? Well, hope is a term that I no longer use, that I think hope assumes too much in terms of future as different from the present, right? So it's not language I use. I don't use the language of hope. Instead, I talk in terms of the persistence of possibility, because for me, that is a more humble and aware way to think in terms of our action rather than to assume outcomes that are different. For me, the persistence of possibility also privileges the moment. It privileges something about our struggle, our push against injustice, that it could be the case that our push against injustice, our ability to sustain our push against injustice is the win. So
So
yeah,
funny that you
hope,
mentioned that. Sorry.
freedom, liberation are not part of my vocabulary any longer. I think in terms of the persistence of possibility.
Yeah. Makes me think we had a speaker at our conference this year, Deb from American Atheists, and speaking to the same thing. It is the persistence that we should really embrace and celebrate. So yeah, love that. Got another question here I see too.
Yeah, and this one is about so hip hop has long been treated as a barometer of Black political consciousness, yet today it reflects sharp ideological fractures. It seems to me, and then the question is, how does Black humanist thought interpret this fragmentation? It's my argument is it demonstrates the complexity of populations, that there's no reason to believe that all Black folks are political progressives, right? That we are a complex population. There's no reason to believe that all folks are political progressives. We are a complex and thick and contradictory community. And so for me, this within hip hop culture, some who are in support of Trump, those who are opposed, is a better representation of the look of Black and brown communities.
Yeah, great. Got another one here, actually. Oh, just someone thanking you for your perspective. Love it.
Thank you, Doctor.
Great. Speaking to another thing, many of us secular folks are looking for ritual.
Yes.
In your chapter on Houston hip hop, you describe this lab or custom cars as a mobile temple and the consumption of scissor or lean as a form of communion. You even compare the chopped and screwed music style to speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
How do these specific local rituals provide spiritual grounding in ways that traditional religion doesn't?
Yeah. So I wouldn't use spiritual. That's another term that
Mm,
that I don't widely use. I have some issues with it. But let me say a word just on ritual within secular context first. That I think too often we assume that ritual belongs to theists. And we do ourselves a disservice when we do that. That ritual becomes a way to map out time and space, right? To see the significance of how we occupy time and space. And secular folks do ritual. Think about ritual this way. Don't think in terms of what's happening in a church, mosque, or synagogue. Think about ritual this way. Ritual is simply repeated activity in founded space. It's repeated activity in founded space. So, to the extent you have these conversations at a regular time with a regular pattern, this qualifies as a ritual. Each year, when the American Humanist Association has its meeting with a slate of speakers and other activities that bring folks together, that is ritual. Ritual becomes again a way to be mindful of our occupation of time and space, to be mindful of our meaningfulness. And I think within the context of hip hop culture in Houston in particular, there are ways in which slab culture is this presentation of our importance, our beauty, our occupation of time and space, and our creativity, right? Because they're taking cars that need work and rendering them fabulous, right? So it kind of speaks to our creativity as well, and that our thinking at its best, our ability to see what isn't. And I think in terms of the chopped up and screwed, in terms of DJ Screw's music and speaking in tongues, both of them involve a manipulation of language. A manipulation of language that's meant to free it to tell a different type of story, to highlight a different type of knowledge. So with DJ Screw slowing down songs we're already familiar with, he forces a different type of confrontational awareness of words and their meaning.
yeah,
I think this for me relates to what graffiti artists have done,
mm,
tagging,
yeah,
right? There's something about the presentation of one's name in a public space that gives you vitality, importance, kind of historical significance. And I think there are ways in which this manipulation of language is meant to do the same thing. Like these two elements of hip hop culture both speak to our meaningfulness, a presentation of us in time and space that values our materiality. That what you get with DJ Screw slowing down these songs, the SOS bands, just be good to me.
mm,
Like slowing this down kind of emphasizes certain dimensions in the same way that the artist Basquiat, for folks who are familiar with him, often in his paintings, there are words that are crossed out. Yeah. And these crossed out words both erase those words, but also amplify them. And I think there are ways in which DJ Screw slowing down these words both erases them, but also amplifies them. Speaking in tongues alters this vocabulary, alters this language, but still, in another way, amplifies it, makes it tell a different type of story. Basquiat's use of language crossing out makes these words tell a different story. DJ Screw slowing down music makes these words tell a different story. Speaking in tongues in a Pentecostal church changes the words, makes them tell a different story.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, fascinating. Do you feel like there's anything that our listeners can learn from that sort of refusal to rush? Obviously, we live in this like super high speed, instant gratification sort of society. What can we learn from Chopped and Screwed?
Patience, right? Patience, that there's a kind of savoring of moments. And I think this is a bit of a stretch, but I think there are ways in which it also says something about the duration of time to satisfaction, right? That it kind of stretches out moments in a way that kind of forces us to be aware of time. And I think there's some value in that. But it's also the case, just on a more pragmatic level, this music is part of car culture. So this chopped up and screwed music doesn't necessarily work in New York on the train, right? It's car culture. And slabs, you don't speed down the street, you move slowly. Yeah. And this music accommodates the slow movement of a slab, the slow down sense of reality that comes with drink.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you feel like is the I think you just I don't want to hold you too much longer. We've got time to go here soon, but you just talked a little bit about these sort of relational awareness to like the sound that hip hop has produced, and obviously there's like East most people just know East Coast, West Coast rap. There's a lot in between. And one of my favorite sort of regional sounds, I suppose, is out of Virginia Beach, Pharrell, um, you know, Clips, and you know, songs, the innovative sounds that sort of existed in that region. Do you feel like they're pulling from their environment as well, or like, what do you feel like is the source of regional hip hop, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, I think that in part is the genius of hip hop, that it adapts to its environment,
Yeah,
right? That it is aware of context and it fits itself within a context and explores and explains that context.
yeah. Read the
So
room.
Outkast has a particular sound.
Yeah,
Uncle Luke and the Two Live Crew, a particular sound. NWA, a particular sound. The Ghetto Boys, a particular sound that reflect environment. And again, I think in part this is the genius of hip hop. And this is one of the things that has allowed it to be compelling across social realities, appealing in the suburbs, appealing in the inner city, that it speaks to a kind of depth of experience that is complex, that is layered, that is varied.
Janelle Costa was a great um, tribute to them the other night. So I mean, as well as D'Angelo as well. D'Angelo, what a
Ah,
loss.
D'Angelo.
I know it's terrible. So well, we've got one question on here from someone here. And then maybe we could take one more question in the chat box before we wrap up. It looks like Walter has a question here for you. Be looking for questions. Oh, does Dr. Penn want to see music used explicitly in humanist communities?
Well, I think music is used within humanist communities. So, for example, I'm thinking in terms of Black Nonbelievers Network, Music is Central, or Human Oasis, Houston Oasis, where I am.
Hmm.
Music plays a fundamental role in their Sunday gatherings. So I think music is already a part of the humanist movement, but I think there needs to be a greater appreciation for a diversity of music. The kind of resistance I still get to the idea that hip hop is substantive, for me, is shameful.
Yeah.
That, so there needs to be a greater recognition of musical traditions. I think hip hop has a lot to say to the humanist movement. And this is the last thing I'll say on it. So we've got a movement that is always asking the question, how do we grow? Right? And humanism in the context of the United States is still a marginalized tradition held suspect. Yeah. Hip hop starts with black and brown young folks who are marginalized and despised, and it has become a global phenomenon. It has transformed how we think, how we communicate, yeah, how we form communities. We might want to find out how hip hop has done this rather than being dismissive of it, because clearly it has gotten it right.
Yeah, and I mean, I see a lot of folks looking to the church for these answers. So maybe looking to
Yeah.
hip hop music.
Yeah, hip
Maybe
hop
that's the
culture
way.
has done it
Maybe.
like no other, right? I mean, it is global.
Mhm.
And so humanists who are interested in how do we reach new populations? How do we make ourselves compelling? You might want to learn some lessons from hip hop culture because those folks have gotten it right.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll ask one more question and we'll close. Speaking of someone who got it right, we haven't mentioned this name enough, Tupac. Um, now, you mentioned Tupac is, not just a rapper, but as a Black Jesus, if you will, and a trickster figure who challenges death. For someone who feels spirituality adrift today, what lessons can we all take from Tupac's thug life as a form of conversion to the world rather than an escape from it?
Yeah. And so part of what's valuable to me about Tupac is the way in which he re-envisions Jesus. That Jesus isn't concerned with this kind of reified, unobtainable moral standard. That for him, Jesus, Black Jesus, is the patron saint of thugs, that he understands how hard it is to live in the context of this world and is okay with the creative ways in which folks try to make life meaningful. Right. So, on one level, it seems to me what we need is a sense of meaningfulness, right? A kind of sense of belonging that is deeply earthy and grounded, that has a much more mature moral and ethical orientation and understanding, that kind of recognizes where people are and is willing to meet them where they are.
Number one principle of organizing, meet people where they're at,
There you go.
right? Cool. Well, with that, we'll be respectful of your time. Particularly since we've asked you here to teach us something. I think we should probably let you go and get on with your evening. But really appreciate you